In Week 1, we saw less than impressive outings from many of the league's top quarterbacks, but numbers-wise, nobody performed worse than Cincinnati's Joe Burrow. Against Cleveland on Sunday, Burrow averaged 2.6 yards per attempt, good for the worst average of his pro career by 2 full yards. He completed less than 50% of his passes for the first time since he was drafted, and posted a career-low passer rating of 52.2. Statistically, it was by far the worst outing we've seen from Joe Burrow in a Bengals uniform. So this week, I set out to understand what exactly went wrong for Cincinnati's offense against Cleveland, and whether or not we should expect these issues to linger as the season progresses. The biggest limiting factor for this Bengals offense on Sunday was the dominance of Cleveland's defensive line. Burrow was pressured on 45.5% of his dropbacks, which ranked 7th highest among qualifying quarterbacks. However, his average time to throw was just 2.32 seconds, which was good for 2nd quickest among qualifiers. The chart you see on your screen now plots time to throw against pressure rate for every quarterback who took the majority of their team's offensive snaps in Week 1, and Burrow's numbers are represented by the orange X you see at the bottom right corner. So even though he was letting go of the ball quickly against Cleveland, Burrow was pressured at a very high rate. Cleveland's defensive linemen put on a clinic on Sunday, but the game plan for Browns defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz and his staff wasn't quite as simple as "my guys are better than yours." Schwartz employed some schematic strategies that allowed for dictation of Cincinnati's pass protection calls, creating favorable matchups for his best pass rushers. On this play from early in the first quarter, the Bengals were facing 3rd down and 5, and Cleveland's defensive line came out in a 5-man bear front with Myles Garrett lined up over the center. Now, bear fronts like this align a defensive lineman over each of the 5 offensive linemen, which forces the offensive line into what's known as 5-0 protection. 5-0 is a man-to-man protection scheme that simply tells each offensive lineman to block the guy lined up opposite them. That call guarantees a one-on-one matchup between Bengals center Ted Karras and Browns edge rusher Myles Garrett. And for Jim Schwartz, that's a dream scenario. After Garrett does his best Allen Iverson impression, he torches Karras, forces Burrow out of the pocket, and his teammates finish the job with a sack on 3rd down. As cool as it is to watch Garrett cross up the center, I want to take you back to the sideline angle to show what was going on downfield when Garrett beat his man. Behind this 5-man blitz, the Browns called man-free cover 1, which calls for man coverage across the board with a single deep safety covering the post. Cincinnati called a levels concept between the number 2 and number 3 receivers to the trip side of the formation, which tells the number 3 to run an intermediate crosser and the number 2 to run a shallow. The concept also calls for the number 1 up top to run a stutter fade and the number 1 at the bottom to run a 10-yard outbreaker. Now, I want you to look at all of these receivers when the pass rush gets home. At this point, Burrow has Myles Garrett in his face, and not a single one of Cincinnati's receivers is ready to be targeted. It is impossible to execute drop-back passing concepts when pressure comes in this quickly. So this sack isn't a fault of the play call, nor is it a fault of Burrow. It's simply a result of the mismatch created by Cleveland's bear front. The Browns kept going back to this 5-man front over and over again throughout the game because it was just too much for Cincinnati's offensive line to handle. So, in an effort to help the pass protectors out, Cincinnati started chipping Myles Garrett with an eligible receiver when he lined up on the edge, but even that didn't make much of a difference. On this 2nd down from late in the first quarter, Cleveland again deployed a bear front on the line of scrimmage, and Cincinnati had the tight end Irv Smith chip Myles Garrett to disrupt his rush. Anticipating the chip, Garrett slanted his rush inside, again forcing Burrow to leave the pocket before the downfield route concept could develop. This time, Cincinnati called mirrored blaze out routes from the number 1 receivers with a crossing route from the slot, and Ja'Marr Chase created tons of separation on a great route. But again, by the time the route had enough time to develop, Burrow was no longer in the pocket. Cincinnati is home to one of the most explosive passing offenses in football, but it is extraordinarily difficult to push the ball downfield under these circumstances. There were opportunities for big plays, just none that had enough time to develop before the pass rush got home. Here, the Bengals called a fake screen with pre-snap motion from Ja'Marr Chase to create a 4-by-1 structure. Chase's motion put 4 eligible receivers on one side of the formation, which is a somewhat unique look and often causes miscommunication in the secondary. Cleveland countered the motion with a sling rotation from the 2 safeties, which essentially tells the safety on the side where the motion is coming from to go to the post, and the safety in the post to follow the receiver in motion. At this point, the safety would take the new number 3, the nickel would take Chase as the new number 2, and the wide corner would remain responsible for number 1. Expecting a quick throw to Chase in the flat, both the nickel and the safety bit on the pump fake. That left Tyler Boyd open down the seam, but by the time Burrow pulled it down after the pump fake, Myles Garrett was once again right in his face. Cincinnati got to a point where they couldn't execute anything that required Burrow to hold onto the ball for more than 2 seconds. And the only downfield routes that don't need 2 seconds to develop are goes and fades. Cincinnati happens to be the best team in the league at executing these routes because they have 2 alpha receivers on the outside and a pinpoint accurate quarterback throwing the football. But Burrow didn't connect with Chase or Higgins on a go ball a single time all afternoon. According to Sports Info Solutions, Joe Burrow targeted go or fade routes on 4 of his 31 pass attempts against Cleveland, but all 4 fell incomplete. Take a look at this play from late in the third quarter. Cleveland called cover 3 Mabel, which calls for cover 3 to the bottom half of your screen, and straight man-to-man on T. Higgins up top. After seeing the press from Browns cornerback Martin Emerson on T. Higgins to his left, Burrow decides to target Higgins on a go route as his pre-snap alert read. And I want you to pay close attention to Emerson's technique here. As soon as Higgins declares this outside release, Emerson immediately gets his head around to look for the ball. Emerson knows that Cincinnati can't call any route that requires a downfield break for Higgins because by the time he breaks, Burrow will be under pressure. Emerson played the go route all the way and was rewarded with a pass breakup. Cleveland's defensive backs were able to fully commit to the go ball when perimeter receivers released outside because the ball had to be out quickly every single play. Don't get me wrong, Denzel Ward, Martin Emerson, Greg Newsome, and Grant Delpit all performed very well on Sunday. But this aggressive game plan doesn't work if Myles Garrett and Zadarius Smith aren't getting after Joe Burrow play after play. Once they had a 14-point cushion, the Browns defense let their foot off the gas by calling more conservative 2-deep zone coverages, in contrast to the man-free and 3-deep fire zone blitzes that made up the majority of Cleveland's defensive calls. This, in theory, would open up the playbook for Cincinnati, but even with only 4 defenders rushing the passer, Cleveland continued to generate pressure. On this make-or-break 4th and short from the 4th quarter, Cleveland rolled into a Tampa 2 cloud coverage from this pre-snap 1-high structure. And the front side of Burrow's progression here is a concept sometimes known as follow or knife, which tells the number 1 to run a 3-step in route and the number 2 to run a corner. Post-snap, T. Higgins separates on his in-breaker, but as he gets open, Zadarius Smith is in Burrow's face. Obviously, the speed at which Smith was able to win with this counterspin is far from ideal, but you'd like to see Burrow be a bit more decisive here. And that brings me to my next and final point, which is that Joe Burrow just wasn't himself on Sunday. Take this play as an example. The Bengals got a man-free look from Cleveland and came out in a stack formation to the offensive right, with Jamar Chase up on the line of scrimmage running a corner route, and Tyler Boyd behind him running a 3-step in route. Boyd gets a free release off the line and separates over the middle, but Burrow leaves it behind him. Misses like these are really rare to see from Joe Burrow. He's been one of the league's most accurate quarterbacks since he broke out in 2021, ranking in the top 5 in completion percentage in both of the last 2 seasons. He missed time battling an injury in camp and preseason, so it's likely that losing some of those reps played a role in his performance on Sunday. As for the protection issues, I would be a bit concerned if I were a Bengals fan. Protection has been a problem for Cincinnati for a while now, and it seems to be trending in the wrong direction. That said, Cincinnati's offensive line is not going to have to block Myles Garrett and Zadarius Smith every week. Protection might continue to be an issue, but they faced arguably the best pair of pass rushers in the entire league on Sunday. So it's not time to hit the panic button. At least, not yet. But that's going to do it for today's video. If you'd like to support the channel, you can check out my Patreon and Twitter, both of which will be linked in the description. As always, thank you guys for sticking around despite my less than consistent upload schedule. Now that football's back, I'll be uploading more often. So until next time, peace.